Hi, you guys. Well, thank you for joining today's expert series talk on kangaroo rats by Thea Wang. So we kind of started this expert series talk in order for students and as well as biologists and non-professionals and the publics to be a little bit more aware about the environment and as well as the research that's going on just in Southern California, but as well as in the States and other parts of the world. And it kind of shows on how these research helps implement some of the stuff that's going on right now. So I do have a little background information on Thea. Let me go ahead and give you your an intro on her. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so Dr. Thea Wang is the Rare Specialist Program Director at Endemic Environmental Services and the Associated Nonprofit for Institute for Conservation Research and Education, and then on-call biologist at Harris and Associates. He holds federal and states permits for Stefan's kangaroo rat, San Bernardino Kangaroo Rat, Pacific pocket mouse, and Los Angeles pocket mouse. Thea's PhD thesis topics was on the social behavior of yellow-bellied marmots, advised by Dr. Pete Nonacs. Probably didn't say that correctly, sorry. In the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Departments, University of California of Los Angeles, so UCLA. Thea is based in Los Angeles and a member of the Southern California chapter of the Wildlife Society and the incoming chair of the Diversity Committee of the Wildlife Society Western Section. So with that, I would introduce Ms. Thea Wang.
Okay, thanks for the intro. Oh no, so not going to advance. Hold on. There we go. All right. I don't usually start talks with acknowledgements, but a ton of people that actually worked on this research said they were going to join. I'm not sure if they actually are. I can't see all the names. I don't think they actually did. But anyway, so I just want to call out Emily Gray, who was there for almost all of the research, and also Suzanne too. The other thing I wanted to start off with is the last time I did this talk was for, or I made this talk for an artist friend of mine who I met during a bird banding course in Riverside. And she has the Institute for Interspecies Art and Religions, which is another one of those, names that are kind of like a lot of letters and hard to remember. And we did an event that was a kangaroo rat comic book drawing workshop. So I talked about kangaroo rats and I gave kind of a slice of life, a picture of the slice of their life, and then Aiden, the artist, did a prompt, and her prompt was about the kangaroo rats had a problem and they had to have an encounter with another species and find some food. And so everyone came up with like a little comic, and I will include some of those in this talk as we go along. Okay, so back for my background, like Anita said, I got my PhD from the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department, and I studied the social behavior of yellow-bellied marmots. And if you know the department, you would assume that I did my PhD thesis with Dan Blumstein because he also studies marmots, but actually I was with Dr. Peter Nonacs, and he studies social behavior mostly in ants. And then after that, I did a postdoc and I worked as a researcher at the San Diego Zoo for what is now called the Wildlife Alliance. And that was with Dr. Deborah Shire, who is kind of a heteromyid guru. And you know how they always say that you look like your pets or your pets look like you, also your study species potentially. And Deborah is like small and blonde. And apparently one time when she was at a field site watching kangaroo rats, a barn owl mistook her for a tasty morsel and tried to like pick her up by her hair. but didn't actually get her. Anyway, so the background for kangaroo rats is they are heteromyids, which just means that they're clade. That's who they're most closely related to. They're all nocturnal. And so you can see by their body type where they have these really big eyes, really, really good for navigating in the dark. They are also seed eating. So they go around and collect seeds, and they live in burrows underground, and they make their own burrows. So they really sort of modify the environment by making these burrows. And they have fur-lined cheek pouches. And this is like, if everybody always says heteromyid rodents and fur-lined cheek pouches in one sort of like combo. And last time people were just like, what, why? But down at the bottom, there's a picture, and that's a kangaroo rat with their cheeks stuffed totally full with seeds. And they're external cheek pouches. So it's actually not inside their mouth, it's outside their mouth. And they are lined with fur, opposed to something like a regular squirrel that has a cheek pouch, but doesn't have any fur in their cheek pouch. And then the other picture is of a LAPM, so Los Angeles pocket mouse with full cheeks. And so that's like from the outside, that's what it looks like. But I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that that's not a kangaroo rat. So I put the LAPM says not a K rat for a kangaroo rat. Okay. And all the kangaroo rats have sort of a role in their community of being these little bipedal animals that hop around in this saltatory motion, which is just where you hop and don't put your front arms or legs down. And this is convergently evolved with a bunch of other species, specifically the kangaroo. So they're not related to kangaroos, they're rodents, but they look like them because they move kind of in the same way. And this saltatory motion has actually evolved 5 times in rodents. So I also have a picture of a jerboa, which is from Asia, and they also jump around, but they look completely different. And this is like one of my pet peeves. This is one of my like Marvel comic moments where whenever people are talking about kangaroo rats and actually put a picture of a jerboa, I find it very annoying. So because they're so completely different, but I put the picture in here. And also I have a dinosaur, and I put it in kind of as a joke because to me, they always just seemed like they had the same kind of body and the same kind of motion. But actually, I read an article about saltatory motion, and they said 5 times in rodents, also kangaroos, and also birds, and possibly some dinosaurs. So I wasn't totally off. Anyway, kangaroo rats in some places, some species of kangaroo rats are considered ecosystem engineers. So they're very important to the community. They have lots of benefits. They really determine the vegetation community by being a seed predator. So they eat some of the seeds and leave some of the seeds. They also create burrows, which concentrates water in certain areas and brings nutrients up to the surface. So they do a lot of stuff. They also are tasty. So they are prey items for a lot of species. And such as barn owls, kit fox, bobcat, rattlesnakes, and coyote. And the ones that I've actually seen in the process of like kangaroo rats being predated on is definitely barn owls. So barn owls is a big one. And coyotes. Coyotes are opportunistic, and sometimes they would come to our traps, which was pretty bad. But yeah, so they won't be opposed to eating a kangaroo rat. And then when you talk about the other members of the small mammal community that they might be living with, sometimes you have little pocket mice. So that would be something like a PPM or an LAPM, and also spiny pocket mice. And those are called, or the genus Catadipus, or we call them like chifas or chicas, and also deer mice, which is like a variety of Paramuscus that they could live with. And one of their main seed competitors, so things that would take all the seed if they could, ironically, are harvester ants. So Peter Nonacs, my advisor, studied harvester ants. I've done my fair share of harvester ant work, and now they're like total nemesis, where they take all the food from the traps and, are basically in the way. Okay. So I broke this talk down into 3 different parts. So I'm going to talk about kind of the first section is, if you think of it in the night in the life, instead of like a day in the life, a night in the life of a kangaroo rat, because they're nocturnal. So first they would be waking up and coming out of the burrow. And then one of the kind of a problem that they might encounter, and a study that I've done, is with artificial light at night. And then you have the midnight, or the middle of the night, and you can talk about like what makes a good habitat for them. So what food's there, what's the habitat like? And then in the end, it's like going to sleep and what happens then. And I'll talk about range restrictions and sort of like the status of the species, various species now. Okay. So usually waking up is done about 30 minutes after sundown. So it's after it's dark, and they would come out of their burrows. Kangaroo rats are considered solitary, but they have important social structure. So they don't necessarily want to be touching any other kangaroo rats, but they need kangaroo rats in their environment. And my advisor, Deborah Shire, has done research where she translocated them with family groups or with known, basically taking the same known individuals from where they came from and then translocating them into a new habitat. And that actually, and they do better when they have their known individuals nearby, so familiar individuals nearby. And in the case where you would have animals or kangaroo rats in the same burrow, would be kind of a mother and offspring situation. And definitely the pups will stick around for a little bit after they seem like adults. And we would always trap like a tiny kind of young teenager kangaroo rat in this like really sweet burrow, and it'd be like, oh yeah, you're still living with your mom, like you didn't come up with that all yourself. And then an important factor for kangaroo rats is moonlight. So a lot of nocturnal animals really change their behavior based on the phase of the moon, and that determines like when we trap. We won't trap around 3 days around the actual full moon. So when there's more light, there's actually less kangaroo rat activity based on the moon. And then this is just a picture of a sleeping kangaroo rat. Okay, so the first research, like part of my research I'm going to talk about is artificial light at night. And artificial light has been a known problem for a long time for humans, but not related to wildlife, related to astronomy. So, if you want to go see stars and, a comet or something like that, you go out into the desert where there's not a lot of light around, and then you can see, stars in the Milky Way and stuff like that. But recently, in the last, however many industrialized years, there's a huge, rapidly expanding environmental pollution problem, which in the terms of light. So this is both in the amount of light and the intensity of light. And that has known to affect animal behavior or wildlife behavior in terms of navigation. And the classic story that everybody knows about is sea turtles when they hatch on the beach and then they're trying to get to the water and they get distracted or thrown off by streetlights and go in the wrong direction. And artificial lights also change the reproductive behavior in mammals such as wallabies. There's studies in Australia of wallabies that actually have shifted reproductive timing the ones that have more artificial light are different than the ones that don't. So it has these like really strong behavioral reactions in wildlife. And it's also known to suppress immune systems, including in humans, and impair stress responses. And this is, so if you're a kangaroo rat biologist, you're always working in the middle of the night. And then you're reading all these papers and they're like, oh, actually, you know, looking at artificial light all night is actually really bad for you. And that, I think in the most of the studies are not with kangaroo rat biologists, but with people who work in factories that have like these, you know, really bright light all the whole time when they're working. And so ultimately the idea is that all these different changes are going to disrupt ecological and evolutionary processes and ultimately decrease biodiversity if some species can't really handle having this artificial light, or if it changes their behavior so much that they can't reproduce. And particularly vulnerable to artificial light are small mammals that are nocturnal. So they've evolved under low light levels, and that's, you know, kind of known to be a reason why you can escape from predators. In the dark, it's like easier to get away from predators, but only under these low light conditions. And so increasing moonlight and artificial light actually increases the risk of predation by visual predators such as owls, and is known to decrease foraging. And so we did an experiment with Stevens kangaroo rats where we had this system of 3 light treatments. And we set up you can see that in the picture, there's a light on the top of a pole. So we had an artificial light and a battery powering it. And then we had 3 different light treatments. And we would set up these arrays where you had, so this is demonstrated by A, B, and C. Down at the bottom, there's a pole. And then into the habitat, there's an array of food trays. And they're 5-meter increments all the way out into 50 meters. So what we can do is put a known amount of food on all these resource trays and then shine the light on it, let the kangaroo rats forage. And then later on in the morning when they're, you know, we'll come back and take those trays away and kind of count how much has been taken from each one. So if they perceive more risk, they will avoid that resource tray. And the graph on the right is just the light measured in microwatts per centimeter squared over the distance. So that just shows that the light is the strongest by the light pole. So like the source of the light makes the light the strongest, and then it has like a pretty big drop off around 35 meters, and you can't really tell that there's light by the light meter. You can still see the light, but it's not as much measurable light. And so the results of this study was that we did find that, well, the model that had was the most significant in terms of their behavior included moon phase, distance of the light, and also the light treatment. And so once again, the light treatments were having a or maybe I didn't talk about it. The continuous light, which was a light all the time, and then a partial light, which was one on a timer. So it was on for 30 minutes and off for 30 minutes. And then the third treatment was a control, which was just like the pole with no light. And so we found that when you look at the probability of depleting a resource patch, is they took the most amount of, or they were most likely to take food from the control, which is just like darkness, whatever was going on in the real light. And then the least was from the continuous, which makes sense because it's the lights on the whole time. And when you look at the distance, you can tell that it didn't really matter where those resource patches were, how far out from the light they were for control or partial light, but it did matter for continuous light. Hold on, I'm gonna get one. Sorry. So the artificial light led to significant changes in their foraging behavior, mainly being the continuous light was the most important. And also the change happened around 35 meters, which corresponds to where we could also measure the light. And ultimately, this may make a difference for kangaroo rats if they're in some sort of situation like next to a giant warehouse that has tons of light and they can't actually spend as much time foraging as they normally would, and maybe they wouldn't gather the resources to be able to successfully reproduce. And because kangaroo rats have this very kind of sad overlap in habitat preferences with humans, because they really, really need flat land without that many rocks. And so that's ends up being where humans also like to build. I've done most of my kangaroo rat work in Riverside or San Bernardino County, and kind of in areas that used to be a little rural agricultural and now are just becoming more and more urbanized with lots and lots of warehouse type buildings on kangaroo rat habitat. And the management recommendations for this artificial light are to reduce the amount of lights that are put up in the kangaroo rat habitat, and also potentially change it so that if you can shield the lights or even use a motion sensor light or something to reduce the amount of light that's actually going into the environment. And you can read more about this study in the environmental pollution in this article that is down at the bottom. Okay. And this is one of the members of the comic book, the Kangaroo Rat comic workshop. And in this, you have the kangaroo rat enjoying a nice dark night, approaches an area that has an artificial light and turns around and goes the other way. So it's sort of like excluding the kangaroo rat from this area that has the artificial light. Okay. I think we're holding questions to the end, but this is kind of the end of part one. So if there are questions, feel free to ask them.
Thea, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
And this is Robin, by the way. I don't know if you can see the names.
No.
Hi. I was wondering, like, if they have like large piles of seed, are they more willing to partake in risky behavior? Because normally the seed might be a little more scattered, but in the case of this experiment, it's a lot of resources in one location.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. We had a controlled amount of seed on each of the resource patches. So for our experiment, we were just testing one concentration of seeds, but it's true, you could do it again and you could have like low reward resource patches or something like that. And that might be less desirable for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Great question. Any other questions? Okay.
I have a couple questions. Okay. One question. With this year being a very rainy year, is that more difficult for kangaroo rats in general, or is it a better situation?
Are you asking a leading question? Because that actually goes into my next section.
I don't know the future. I was just asking a question. You can answer it in your talk if you want.
Okay, I'll answer it in the next section. Do you have another question about this part?
Yeah, and you can push me if you want. Push it. I'm always curious when it comes to kangaroo rats and the predator prey with burrowing owls, especially since they're both covered species in these habitat conservation plans a lot of times for these species specific. Is there any like studies that have been done on the pressures that a burrowing owl population would put on kangaroo rats?
So I don't know. Do we have Suzanne on the call? She said she was supposed to come, but I don't think she is.
She is not.
So she could answer this better than me, but I know the zoo had a lot of cameras out, and they were actually they're studying a burrowing owl site. I don't know if they were translocated there or they have artificial burrows, but they definitely have cameras monitoring all the prey that they brought to the offspring. And I think kangaroo rats are important, but not the only thing. And if you have a successful kangaroo rat area, then I don't think they would like decimate the kangaroo rats.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely the multi-species reserve has tons of artificial burrowing owl burrows and also translocated kangaroo rats there. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, just a refugee camp essentially for burrowing owls and kangaroo rats.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a question for you, Thea. I have two questions actually.
Okay. Yeah.
So have you guys ever done experiments with red lights, if that would affect the how often the kangaroo rat will come in to feed? And secondly, did you guys also take into consideration of other species eating the food? Like, did you guys take account into that?
Yeah, so we have cameras on the trays too. Not all of them, but a lot of the trays had cameras. And I have looked through the videos to like identify the different species. But actually for this experiment, it was on the plateau, which is in the multi-species reserve, that when we trap it, it's almost 100% SKR. So it's not other sites like where the PPM, it's like not always PPM, and the San Bernardino one. So yeah, I see what you mean, but for this particular site, it's like all kangaroo rats all the time. And then the other question was, sorry.
About using red lights.
Oh, yeah. So when in the PPM facility, they use red lights so that to not bother the rodents. So we didn't really test that, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those were my only two questions.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move into the next portion and hopefully answer Barry's weed question. All right. So okay, we're in the middle of the night, and they do a lot of activity right after dusk and right before dawn. So maybe there's like after you collect a lot of seeds, you're kind of resting right at the middle of the night. But this is, for this section, I'm going to talk about what makes a good kangaroo rat habitat. And for the most part, it's largely dependent on soils. So they need the right types of soils to make their burrows, but they also need enough food and to be able to escape from predators. And food for kangaroo rats coming from seeds kind of depends on how much water, how much rain there is, how much growth there is that year. But the problem comes with kangaroo rats really, really need open habitat. So when they, when you're looking at kind of percentage wise, they need an area that has vegetation covering less than 50%. And so what this means is usually there's like shrubs or sparse shrubs, and then an open space, and then another shrub. And they can get the seeds from the shrubs, but they can also use their hopping behavior to get, across the open space. And they can also escape from predators by hopping out of the way. And when there's a lot of rain, that also brings in, like, right now, a lot of non-native grasses. So the non-native grasses grow in kind of a different way than the shrubs. And they create these really tall thickets of long grass that's like kind of an impenetrable block for if you're the height of a kangaroo rat. And they So they're using their saltatory behavior or motion where they jump from place to place. And so they really need to be able to see or hear or see the predator and to be able to jump out of the way and have that clear kind of space to make turns and stuff like that. So in a year like this, I mean, the other thing that they do is that since they have those cheek pouches, they also cache a lot of food. So they can, versus something like a Peromyscus, they're going around and collecting all the food. And that actually really helps them in periods of where there's not a lot of food around versus animals that have to just like eat all the time, whatever they can get at the moment instead of storing it for later. So if you're comparing heteromyids to non-heteromyid rodents, then when there's kind of like a wet, very food-rich year, then they get a little bit outcompeted by the other rodents because they're obviously doing really well in the moment, and their kangaroo rat's special caching skill is kind of wasted. And then the other thing is their particular escape behavior of jumping out of the way is really bad when the invasive grass is really long. So this next experiment was about removing the invasive grasses from the site. And the question was, does the method of how the invasive grass is removed from the site impact the translocation success? So this was an area that was, kangaroo rats were taken from an area that was going to be a parking lot and moved into this sort of like nature preserve. And this experiment had 3 different treatments in terms of how they removed the invasive grasses. Were either mowed, grazed, or burned by a controlled burn. And then on top of that, they also either planted native grass seedlings or didn't. And this pizza is trying to represent that, where they had these triangular pieces that were either had one option or that option plus getting the seeds planted in them. And this is just a picture of what that looks like. So this, on the very left-hand side, is a car. So you can see these plots were actually pretty big. And all those blue things are grass seedlings, kind of protection around grass seedlings. And then the piece on the right-hand picture is the invasive grasses like growing into a thicket. And it's very tall, you can't really see, but on the left-hand side, you can kind of see an edge. So that's like an edge of invasive grasses, and then where it's been treated in one of the treatments. And for this experiment, we were checking 6 months after the translocation. And at that point, we found that there were a lot of active kangaroo rat burrows. So this is just counting the burrows, where 50% were in the burned area versus about 20 to 30% in grazed and mows. So burning was actually the best method for getting rid of the grass and for the kangaroo rats. But on top of that, 85% were in the restored subplats with the native grasses. And that, and then that is kind of shown here 2 years afterwards, why potentially this made a difference. So 2 years afterwards, there's way more kangaroo rats in the restored plus whatever the other treatment is. And after a while, the initial treatment didn't really matter that much. Well, there were some, burn is still better, but not as much better as the restored. And ultimately what's going on here is having the restored grasses really kept down the invasive grasses. So kind of the other treatments went back to more invasive grasses and therefore had less kangaroo rats choosing to make burrows in that area. And this is a comic that was drawn from that part of the talk where there's basically, all you need to know about this is that there's tons and tons of invasive grass, which is the green parts. And then the kangaroo rat thinks that they see another kangaroo rat, which is one of the bottom squares down there. But turns out it's actually a snake he couldn't see very well, and it's the predator. So that's sort of like being visually impaired by this grass. And also grass makes a lot of noise. And one of the ways that kangaroo rats can escape from predators is actually listening for them. Okay, so that's the invasive grasses section. So I guess we could stop here, see if there's any questions about this part. Okay. So the last one is going back to sleep. So they're going back in their burrow. They've had a day of foraging, collecting food, meeting other kangaroo rats. Oh, question. Tanya?
Yeah. Yes. Going back to the grazing, how effective was that for weed removal?
The grazing was like the same. I mean, it worked initially. It just doesn't have a lasting effect, I guess.
So you're saying it removed it, it just was more temporary than the burn or mow, like it wasn't as harsh.
Yeah, I think the grazing and the mowing were kind of similar. I think logistically the grazing is a little more difficult because if it kind of depends like exactly how long the animals are like left in the patch, and like if it's like a weekend and then they get like they graze a little too much or something and everything's getting more compacted than it should, or you know, then they move to a different area, they break out of their area. I don't know. I think it seems like for the mowing, it's actually less controllable. And then the grazing, the grazing is less controllable than the mowing.
Yeah, and I could see that. And on top of that, what about the feces of whatever the grazer was? Was it goats or sheep? Like,
yeah, I can't remember exactly what they were. Maybe they were sheep, but yeah, I mean, then it's like, if it didn't completely kill the seeds if the grass is already seeded and it goes through their gut, well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I can look into that for you.
Oh, I'm curious. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So this part was they are having a day, being able to forage, being able to go outside their burrow. And then what happens if they actually can't find any other kangaroo rats, or they can't find the appropriate mate, or they're only with their family? And that, you know, in terms of being range restricted. And that this is relevant for our endangered kangaroo rat species like the San Bernardino kangaroo rat. So this is a map from a paper about a guide to habitat conservation for San Bernardino kangaroo rats, and it just depicts their 3 critical habitat areas, which are so far apart from each other in terms of like being surrounded by urban development. So all the sort of grayish areas are urban development. And if you're a kangaroo rat in the San Jacinto River, you're female, all the males have died out in that area or something like that. There's no way that you're going to be able to get all the way to the Santa Ana River or Lytle and Cajon Creeks. They're just geographically too far away, just very, very separated. And this, I mention it because one of the studies we did was about the genetic or range-wide genetics, and the San Jacinto River kangaroo rats are the ones that are the least genetically diverse. So they're really very isolated down there. Okay. And to kind of, I guess, a conservation management technique for having these range restrictions and very low genetic diversity are translocations. And this is to either augment populations or potentially reestablish populations that have completely gone extinct in that area. And also to make sure that if there was a catastrophic event, there would be some other populations that are still available. But the problem with just translocations is sometimes they don't work, and there's various reasons why they wouldn't work. The first one is that they could have post-release dispersal. So you release them in an area and they actually leave. And there's a lot of examples with birds, which can obviously fly, but they've translocated them 300 miles away and they just come back. So if you don't translocate kangaroo rats far enough away, they can just go back to their original habitat. But they also might just leave if they deem the area inappropriate. So if there's not the right kind of scents and smells and potentially other of the same species are not there, then they'll just try and find somewhere else. They're especially vulnerable to predation right after they're translocated. And they could be super stressed because they're in a new environment, and maybe they can't find enough food, or there's other species there that they're competing for in terms of other resources. And this here is not specifically a kangaroo rat. This is a heteromerine rodent, but it's a pocket mouse. But I'll talk about a little bit about what happened when this species, the Pacific pocket mouse, is so critically endangered that it was beyond just a general translocation where you take someone from one area and move it into another. And this was actually a captive breeding program. So where they're trying to come up with more individuals to be able to translocate them. And the Pacific pocket mouse is now only in three sites. We have the Edson, South San Mateo, and Dana Point. And then actually the San Diego Zoo, we started a new site, which is in the Laguna Coast Wilderness Park. And so that's the green dot on this. And then, so we have these Pacific pocket mouse that were trapped in the wild. The founders were trapped in the wild and taken into a captive breeding facility. And they have pocket mice that are either wild born or captive born. And we did these tests on the Pacific pocket mouse wild born to see if they had an appropriate predator response, which would be to be more vigilant when there is a predator. So there's a couple different ways to test that. First is with a live snake, which is behind plexiglass, so it can't actually get to the pocket mouse. And then also a taxidermied owl. And this one here just shows we have the amount of vigilance of the pocket mouses. So if they're kind of looking up and around versus head down foraging. And this shows three different types where they've been shown either a control, which is nothing, or a snake, a live snake behind the plexiglass, or a stick. And the stick is because it's kind of the same shape as a snake, but it's not actually a snake. And you can see that these are the wild type animals, or the ones that were in the wild caught PPM, and they responded appropriately in the presence of the snake. So they would kind of be worried about it. And this is different than the captive born ones actually don't have the appropriate response until they're trained to like have some exposure to it. And they obviously can't be released into the wild until they've demonstrated that they can respond appropriately to predators. And this one is just for the owl conditioning treatment. And this is also the behavior of the wild ones. And they would respond to either a stuffed owl swinging from this, it's like dropped from the sky over their cage, or just a PVC pipe. And here they did show the appropriate behavior. These are the wild ones, appropriate behavior, proportion of time that they spend looking out for predators in this area. Okay. And so this, I guess this is just showing that, you know, if once we get to a point where we have to kind of grow them in a lab, when we have to like, have this captive captive breeding population, they actually need to have some exposure to predators in order to respond correctly. So actually just for the training, for all the PPM that were trained before they went out, you couldn't actually expose them too many times to the predator without anything happening to them. So you have to just kind of prime them to be worried about it, but not do the kind of fake predator too many times, and then they won't actually care about it anymore. Okay, and so this is just the comic that shows the kangaroo rat coming out of a burrow and seeing a snake and doing the appropriate behavior, which is to jump away. And then because I did this talk for the comic book workshop, and I wanted to point out, this is just me kind of indulging in how cute kangaroo rats are. And I really wanted to, like, if you're drawing them, you need to know these features. But for you guys, I'm just gonna like tell you the same thing. For like, you know, this will be for if you're ever in the field and you're trying to identify a kangaroo rat. First, you look for the shiny dome. They have like the biggest, widest heads. They're like really, their fur is very, very like smooth and shiny. So they have this big shiny dome. And then they have very, very long tails. So the ratio of their body is, they have this like, you know, tail that's like about two times bigger than their whole body. And then in some pictures, it looks like they really don't have any arms, but they really have very short arms. And sometimes they do things with them, like they hold their feet or their tails when you have them in hand. And then the last thing is, like, it's very, very hard to capture kangaroo rat movement in drawings or in pictures. So I really just wanted to show you guys a video of them. And this is like super indulgent because this isn't even a video that I took. This is actually a video from, and I hope that I can do it because I didn't really practice this part, but this is a video from Rulon Clark, who is a researcher out of San Diego State. And let's see if it's gonna work. Oh no, this is the wrong one, hold on.
Under cover of darkness, the world is a safer place for a kangaroo rat. It's mostly hidden from
Yeah, we can't
predators.
see the
While
video.
it searches for
You can't see it,
seeds,
hold on.
its main source of
I was wondering if it was gonna work. It says low system resources. Anyway, well, I'll just put this in the chat. But what I want you guys to do is Google kangaroo rats ninjas. And there's these amazing slow motion videos of them jumping into the, like jumping away from snakes, which I really can't describe to you how cool they are. Hold on, let me go back to my thingy. Okay, so in conclusion, this is the kind of night in the life of the kangaroo rat, shows you kind of 3 things that really affect their survival and are conservation kind of issues for them. The first one was the artificial light at night, which you know, is sort of like a problem that's everywhere. You know, there's not many places in Southern California that doesn't have artificial light. The second one is the invasive grass. Invasive grasses are also kind of ubiquitous. And lastly is land use. So kangaroo rat habitat being changed into houses and, you know, mini malls and everything else that, you know, developers develop it into. And in terms of looking at things from the kangaroo rat perspective, it's sort of like, what do they need from us? What habitat, even if we just set aside an area for them to live in, is that going to be good enough? If it doesn't get, if it's filled with invasive grasses, or if it still has a lot of artificial light, or maybe they're too far away from other populations of kangaroo rats, it's still going to be a problem for them. And ultimately, it's like, what else can we learn from them? What else needs those things to survive? Like, if we notice all the kangaroo rats and heteromyids in generally disappearing from areas, it's sort of like, is that an indication that other things aren't going to be able to survive either? Okay, and then I'll take any questions. Tanya?
Yes. What do you think are any possible impacts from SKR being downlisted?
Yeah, so I know being downlisted was like seen as this really great win for SKR biologists. Like, everyone was like, success, kind of like, look how great it has been. But I know that if a species isn't listed, then there's fewer protections for them. However, stuff's still getting built on SKR habitat. Like, if a developer if it's in private hands, it's only a very small fee. Previously when they were listed. So now that they aren't listed, it's probably even smaller fee. I know areas, SKR's Riverside and San Diego, and Riverside has the MSHCP, and presumably they would have to still, they still consider them in those decisions in terms of like, is the habitat a critical SKR habitat, or is it on a border somewhere? I know when you look at the distribution of SKR, it kind of shows them being able to be in a lot of places which they're not currently are right now. And so it's a question of, in the future, if they can expand, will there be any place for them to expand to? So I don't really know. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad I could get your perspective a little.
Yeah. Any other questions? I just looked at the list. I see some people I didn't know were going to show up. Ethan, I'm looking at you. Or is it Leslie?
So I do have a question for like I might have missed it, but like for like the captive breeding, when you guys are showing like the the stuffed animals, the predators, for the ones that were captive, like how long did it take for them to like realize that that's a natural predator for them?
It's interesting. Either they like kind of having that in their environment makes a general life is not completely safe, kind of. And for the ones that never really got that, they cannot be released. So yeah, the rule for like the training is no more than 3 times. So if they need to see it 3 times, then it's too many and they're gonna die. So they have to stay in, kind of thing.
Okay. Would you say like the majority of them were able to like distinguish that they were actually like a predator?
You mean like if they got the stick or the actual snake? Yeah, they could clearly distinguish between the stick or the snake. The owl situation was harder for them to distinguish. So I think they'd use more cues than just sight for like a snake. Maybe it smells like a snake, or because it was like a plexiglass. They're in an arena with sand and then a plexiglass with like kind of scent, like wind holes. Now, the snake can't get through, but like the scent could go through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then like the other thing that I was gonna say is I think I might have found the video if you want me to share it. Is
I
that-
mean, people can watch it on it's 8 o'clock now. Nobody,
Okay.
watched it, but like I promise you guys, go watch it. It's called like, wait, what is it called? Something kangaroo
Maybe
rats
it's a snake.
hold on. It's called Kangaroo Rats Are Furry, Spring-Loaded Ninjas.
Okay.
You guys should watch it to fully get the whole kangaroo rat experience. And these videos are like slow motion, high powered videos. Like when we're out there in the field, you can't really see that. You don't see them in such great detail jumping away. Oh, Emily, question?
Hi, Thea. Good presentation.
Thanks.
I had a question about the non-native grass, the treatments that you guys use for the burning. I guess for all of the treatments, was that done only once, or did you guys repeat those treatments and then see, what the kangaroo rats did after repetitive treatments, or just once?
No, it was, yeah, I didn't go into the details of that. It was just once, but there were like 6 pies. So it was done multiple times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess you could also do a different kind of experiment, which would be like if you burned it for like 3 years in a row, like what would happen then? Like maybe really be burned, like or maybe it'd be too burned. Like I don't know. But I know like, when they were doing the burning on the reserve, it's like pretty hard to like get all the conditions right. I think it was like hard enough to do it once, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And kind of thinking that way, especially when like fire danger is becoming, it's worse and worse. Probably like, land managers and people getting, sites ready for kangaroo rats or just managing for SKR, they'd probably stay away from that. But I guess if the result was similar, especially if it's like everything in the restoration plots, like if the restoration is there, that's really like the biggest issue, right?
Totally. It seemed like it almost like it didn't matter.
Right.
It only mattered like the first year or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Anita, you're muted.
Sorry, I was gonna say if there was any more questions for you. Okay, if there isn't any more questions, thank you so very much, Thea, for giving your talk on the kangaroo rats. I definitely learned a lot about them today and definitely see how cute they are. And seeing like all those pictures that you took, it was amazing. I especially like the one where he's holding his little tail. That's adorable. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed your talk, and I hope you guys enjoyed this talk as well. And I really hope that you guys get to come next month and see our next talk with Dr. Stila on solar panels.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you, Thea.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.